I'm Dr. Sarah Russell. I'm the youngest of four older brothers. I grew up in East Melbourne. Every school holiday, every weekend, we came to Mount Martha. And I grew to love Mount Martha. And for the last 3 years, I've been living here permanently. But I have been coming here all my life, and I do feel it's my home. I'm a public health researcher who began my career working in universities, but when they became more corporate, I didn't fit in. So I started my own research business, which I called Research Matters. And I've spent the last 20 years talking with people about health, about healthcare systems, public and private. I've talked about mental health, aged care, women's health. I want people's voices to be heard. And so this fits with my career as a parliamentarian. I grew up in a household full of men. I have 4 older brothers and a father who was very interested in politics, although our politics were very different. When I hit about 13, we started to disagree a lot, and I found the disagreements have set me in good stead for the rest of my life. I learnt how to disagree. I don't dismiss people who have different views, and I think that's the important thing in politics, to not just have your view, but to listen and to understand where other views come from. We must not just get into echo chambers, which all we hear about is our own views repeated and heard. We must engage with people with different views. That's how we learn, that's how we grow as a society. When you want to stand up for something, you might not be very popular when you do it. And you've got to have courage and you've got to have persistence. When I was a very young girl, I remember Mum saying quite often that little girls should be seen and heard. I see her as my mother, but also as my mentor. And I learnt a lot from one of her school mottos was deeds, not words. And Mum taught me to be very wary of people who talk a lot about integrity. She said, you must act with integrity. You're known by your actions. I think we currently have the worst government in my lifetime, and I'm quite happy to say that. I know a lot of the independents aren't putting their money on one or the other, but I actually think the current government has moved so far to the right that it's no longer a small L Liberal party. It's now an arch conservative party. So I will never support this party. I do not support the views of this current Liberal government. And I'm quite happy to say that. I'm quite happy to say to people, you should really think about putting Liberals last, because we have to think about how do we get rid of this government. That's why I'm here. I'm partly here to get rid of this government. People have lost trust in our government, and that means they've lost trust in the whole political system. Yeah. And the reason I'm here is I want to build that trust again. I want to be transparent and accountable. And that is the beginning of building trust. There's a lot of very disenfranchised people living on the Mornington Peninsula right now. They're telling me that their vote doesn't count anymore. They're telling me that they don't feel that politics has anything to do with their lives. And that really makes me sad, because a government makes a huge difference to our lives. And that's why I've put my hand up to stand as an independent, because I think we need to engage at the federal level, because decisions the government make affect us all. And that's why my platform has been transparency and accountability, because it's not just having an integrity commission. We need so much more from our government. We're living in an era where a lot of people do not trust their government. And there are many things that we can do federally to help people to regain their trust in government. Our government has been handing out money to very rich people and not being transparent about it, not being accountable for how that money is spent. That's why I'm standing as an independent. I am totally transparent about any donation I've received over $1,000. I'm also very transparent about my policies. They are all on my website. They are not motherhood statements. They are policies that have been researched and the things that I stand for. My values are on my website. My history, my political affiliations, they're all on my website for people to look at, to read, and get a good sense of who I am. The fun part of this campaign has been the number of people I've met, and I often begin the conversation by asking them what matters to you. And many of them talk about similar things. It doesn't matter if you're old or young, where you live in Sorrento or whether you live in Hastings, people are caring a lot about climate. They're really worried for their children and their grandchildren about this total lack of action on addressing climate change. So that's been very important, but it's not just climate. People talk a lot about the environment. They love the peninsula. They love the beaches. They love the inland. They love everything about this peninsula. They want to preserve it. They want to preserve the habitat. They want to preserve the biodiversity down here. And there are also things like housing that's been huge for people down here. Our prices of houses has just gone through the roof, but also the price of renting a house has become astronomical for people. The first thing the government should do, the Commonwealth government, should increase the rent assistance. That's something very simple, because people who don't have housing security, it makes their lives so hard. And many people who are living in that situation are only one life shock away from homelessness. That's all it's going to take to make people homeless. People are talking about the cost of living pressures, and that's really hard for people. People are just really grateful that someone has taken the time to listen. And I think that's really important. People are telling me all the time that they have contacted the MP for Flinders over the last 3 years. They've either not got a response, or they've got what they call a robot response, which is just a standard letter they get. And that is so insulting to people, because they care enough to contact their member, but they don't get respected. Whereas I'm very happy to listen to people and to take on their concerns seriously. And some of these concerns can be dealt with quite easily. And some of them are much more complicated. But they need to be heard, and they need to feel that someone takes these concerns seriously. I would love to be able to take their concerns to Parliament and actually make a difference. Actually speak about people in Flinders, what they are caring about, what they care about right now. Take that to Parliament. Not take my party's concerns to Parliament, but take the people's concerns to Parliament. That's what an independent can do. I've never stood as an independent candidate before. This has not been done for ego. This has not been done as a career change. It's been done because we really believe that our democracy is at stake right now. We need an independent to come into Parliament who's got the expertise, who's got the life history. I'm 60 years old. I'm not a careerist. I didn't plan to ever be Prime Minister. I planned to come into Parliament to be an effective voice on aged care and all the other issues that I've fought for over the last 30 years. I've fought very hard for mental health services. I've fought very hard for climate action, and I've fought for gender equity. But I've done it from the outside. I think it's time for me to get a seat at the table, inside the tent, inside Parliament House, where I can speak without fear or favour. When you set up a campaign, you have to think about your values, and you have to act in a way that is true to those values. And one of the things that was an issue for our campaign was, when do we wear the campaign T-shirt? For example, there was an Indigenous celebration down here in Flinders. I didn't want my supporters to wear my T-shirt to an Indigenous celebration. I wanted to respect that celebration. So there's been a lot of decisions that we've had to make in the last few months that have had to be really thought through properly before we actually act. So that's what I mean when I say deeds, not words. Integrity is a very easy word to use, but what does it mean, and how do your actions reflect that integrity? Now, my values involve treating older people with respect and dignity. And I think our system doesn't do that right now. The media comes to me all the time for comment about aged care, because they know I'm independent. I don't get any money for my advocacy. It's been a voluntary thing where I have tried very hard to improve the lives of older people. My day as an aged care advocate involves taking very many phone calls from people, and they are sad stories. And the stories I was hearing were so confronting and so tragic that they led to more opinion pieces. And I've just started writing, I've now written 75 opinion pieces about aged care, and most of them are about the systemic problems that lead to these horror stories. I never imagined I'd have to fight so hard for something that just seems to me to be so obvious, that we treat older people with respect. They're our elders. They are not people to be dismissed and to be cast aside. They're not cash cows. Some people are using older people as cash cows. And to me, that is abhorrent. And that's why I fought so hard for them to be treated with dignity and respect, because that's what they deserve. The thing about an aged care advocate is we do have government-funded organisations that get quite a lot, millions of dollars. COTA, OPAN, National Seniors, and their job is to advocate for older people. Now, the problem is they are government-funded. Now, they feel they can't criticise the government, whereas most of the criticisms that I make are about the government's lack of action in aged care reform. In fact, it's the lack of meaningful action that actually made me put my hand up to be an independent candidate, because my life the last 6 years has been spent taking phone calls from distressed families. It's been taking phone calls from journalists who need to be informed. I have educated numerous journalists about the issues that they want to write about, but they don't actually have the background. And I've got the background. I'm a public health researcher who has learnt how to do the research, and then that feeds into the journalists. Because journalists, as you know, are running around doing 20 stories. They're not experts in aged care. So I spend my weeks fielding phone calls from relatives, fielding phone calls from residents and recipients of home care packages who are so distressed dealing with this system. They call it navigating the system. How did aged care become a system that people needed to navigate? We should have a good, competent regulator that's job is not just to punish, but its job is to educate providers and help them to deliver a high standard of care. I think what aged care advocacy has done for me is it's taught me how to deal with powerful interests, because I speak to them a lot, and they are often surprised that I'm willing to engage with them. I'm willing to talk with them. I'm willing to hear their views. One of the best conversations I've had have been with large providers. I actually bought shares in Estia and Japara when Japara was on the stock market, because I wanted to go to their annual general meetings and talk to these people and hear them answer my questions. And they have respected that. They have been very willing to engage with me. They've been surprised that I'm willing to engage with them. The more I've had of those, the better I am prepared to go into Parliament and be a strong voice for vulnerable communities. We have people who are homeless on the peninsula. We have 400 people or more sleeping rough every night on the peninsula. They need homes. Social housing is something desperately needed on the peninsula. We have women over the age of 50 sleeping in cars. We don't have crisis accommodation down here for people who are leaving abusive relationships, or very, very little accommodation for people. They need advocates. They need advocates in Parliament, and they need these problems addressed. And there are quite simple solutions to some of these problems. Building 500 social houses right now could house people who are currently sleeping rough. Why aren't these things coming out of our political leaders right now. We have many vulnerable communities in Flinders that feel they don't have a voice. I can be a voice for those people in Parliament where they need to be heard. The most important thing people are asking me now, why would you vote for an independent? Well, we have to look at our history of our Parliament to see how important independents and small parties have been. Think of the Democrats. They kept the bastards honest. The independents like Jackie Lambie and Rex Patrick and Rebecca Sharkey have had such an influence on Parliament. They can really help to get good policy, good legislation enacted in Parliament. We need our political leaders to have a vision for our country. We don't need squabbling between Liberal and Labor and Greens. We need solutions. We need parliamentarians who have a vision for our country. As an independent, I'm not going to be in a party that is leading the country. I'm not going to be Prime Minister. I am someone who's got policies, who has got well-researched policies that can make a difference to people's lives. I really encourage people to read my website and they will see this. The Liberal Party are talking about a hung parliament and how detrimental that will be for our democracy. I feel quite the opposite. Think of Julia Gillard with her hung parliament. She introduced 572 pieces of legislation with a hung parliament. That's more than most Prime Ministers are able to achieve. She did this through negotiation. We need parliamentarians who are willing to negotiate. I haven't seen much negotiation from the current Liberal National Government. They push for their way to be adopted. We need to negotiate. We need parliamentarians who are willing to sit down at a table to compromise. We can't just keep having the same old governments pushing their ideology down our throats. We need independents in Parliament who are going to negotiate. We need Parliament to be a place where ideas are contested, where policies are contested, and that's how we're going to get good policy, good legislation, is through rigorous, evidence-based debate. Not people just hammering home their ideology. We need rigorous, evidence-based debate. We need people in Parliament who know how to debate, who know how to negotiate, and who know how to represent their communities. I will be representing the Flinders electorate. I will be taking the ideas from this community, their concerns, what they want for their future. They want climate action. They want better housing affordability. They want us to work with gender inequity. They want us to work with cost of living. These are concerns, these are real concerns from people in this electorate. They want better aged care services. They want better mental health services. Now, we need someone in Parliament who's going to advocate for that, not just with motherhood statements. There's people who have done their research who can bring to the table a proposal that is then negotiated. I'm that person. I can do that. And when you think about going to work in a toxic workplace like government is now, with the gender issues that haven't been addressed, with the sexual harassment, the alleged rape, our current government has completely failed women. And, you know, it's not a very exciting notion to think, oh, can I go and work in a toxic workplace? But we need women to go into that workplace and we need women to make it better. But what we really need is for men to make it better. We absolutely need to change the language about sexual assault and rape. A man raped a woman. It's not that a woman was raped, it's a man. And once you change the language, you change the focus of where the intervention has to happen. This is not an issue that women have to fix. This is an issue that men have to fix. What we've learned over the last 3 years is that women have had enough. Enough of this disrespect, enough of this sexual assault, sexual harassment. Now, we need action. We need women in Parliament who say this is enough, we've had enough. We need this situation fixed. This government has had so many inquiries, so many reviews. It's had, in terms of women, it's had the Jenkins review. How many of those recommendations have been implemented? Very few. The government is having reviews and inquiries in aged care. They've had a Royal Commission in aged care. Those recommendations, very few of those have been implemented. The banking inquiry, how many of those recommendations were implemented? This has been a government of reviews and announcements and re-announcements, but actually, they haven't actually done very much for us. One of the most startling inquiries we had was the Deaths in Custody review. How many of those recommendations have actually been implemented? Why do the government keep having these expensive royal commissions, these expensive reviews, these inquiries, yet they don't actually act on the recommendations? It's time for us to put pressure on the governments to act on recommendations that have been well researched. They are informed recommendations that are going to make people's lives better. But they just put them in the bottom drawer. They just keep kicking the can down the road. They're not actually fixing problems that will make our lives better. I don't want to be a politician. I want to be a parliamentarian. And that to me is very different. I want to actually serve my community. I have not done this for me. I've done this because I believe that people who care about our country's future actually do need to step up. I think we need people who aren't interested in a salary, who aren't interested in power, who actually want to do something for our country. And that's why I'm standing as a parliamentarian. The most common remark I get from people when they've met me is, "You're so normal." And it's as though politicians have set themselves apart from us. And it just seems to me to be almost, it's really sad, I think, that our politicians have set themselves so far apart from people that, I know people joke about them not knowing the cost of bread or the price of milk or whatever, but it's more than that. It's actually how seriously do you take individuals in your electorate?